Good morning, Trump's family. Have a nice weekend, everyone, and God bless you. Thank you for always watching and subscribing to the channel. Alright, without further ado, let's get into the news. I think there's a whole lot of Ron DeSantis copying Donald Trump is clearly the problem. He's the extreme one, he's the one that gives the left all the ammunition that they need to attack them. The only solution is to switch to Ron DeSantis. Because Ron DeSantis is more moderate, more of a polished politician, they're certainly not going to attack him. Right? Well, that seems to be the narrative, that he's much more palatable and harder to attack. And in a certain way, there is some merit to that argument. But most of that credit, I think, goes to Ron DeSantis, because the man is an expert when it comes to dismantling phony left-wing narratives. And so he's pretty good at dealing with the media. But the idea that the mainstream media is going to treat Ron DeSantis any different from Donald Trump, I think is just a little bit naive. I think it's a little bit nonsensical. I don't think we've seen the left-wing mainstream media's full offensive just yet, rather full defensive, I guess you could say, because when the establishment left's back is against the wall, that's of course when they show their fangs, and it's already starting. I mean, they clearly view Ron DeSantis as a threat. They might even view them as the number one threat, especially moving forward after 2024. And so they're already starting to do the same thing to Ron DeSantis as they are to Donald Trump. Alright, folks, take a look at this from the Gateway Pundit, predictable MSNBC, as Joy Reid insists that Rhonda said this would be more authoritarian than Donald Trump. Everyone listen to this, quote, "But a story about a cartoon creator becoming the voice of the great white male freakout doesn't end at Dilbert or even at Elon Musk, it begins with white grievance politics potentially becoming U.S. federal policy. In Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis becomes President of the United States, which he is clearly aiming for. America will become the land of total government control over women's bodies, black history, gender identity, how you can teach, learn, rethink, even talk. It would essentially be a more functionally authoritarian version of Trump, a more action-less personality type of president who's basically offering two options: pre-civil rights America, or total control of society. But of course, his robust PR team has you thinking quite the opposite, which is why his new book titled, and I'm not making this up, The Courage to Be Free. The Courage to Be Free, as a first-hand account, from the blue-collar boy with a dream to take down Disney and librarians. It got scorched by the New York Times, obviously, its reviewer saying, quote, "All the culture war, Mad Libs can't distract from the dull coldness at this book's core, and that it will leave some supporters who have encouraged DeSantis to humanize himself sorely disappointed. The world DeSantis is building," the reviewer said, down in Florida, as one that uses the power of government to make the Dilbert guys of the world feel comfortable. They feel good about themselves. Center, you know, did you know that this isn't even Baby Mother's first book? He also penned Dreams from Our Founding Fathers, published in 2011. And it pretty much sums up what we already know about the guy. David Wald-Streicher wrote about the book in The Atlantic, saying the most revealing and consequential element of the book is the insistence that the role of slavery and race more broadly does not seriously change anything about how we should understand the birth and development of our country. Okay, folks, so here's the point that I've been making, or trying to make, for a couple of years now. You know, the idea that Ron DeSantis just automatically makes all the problems go away. I think this right here is proof that that is not the case. The problem isn't Donald Trump. The problem is a dishonest, biased, corrupt button paid for left-wing legacy media that will do anything to protect its power, in other words, anything to destroy, dismantle and take down the Republican Party conservative and nationalistic values that oppose the new globalist world order. And this has been my number one criticism against the neocons, the establishment Rhino GOP, and a certain faction of the GOP voter base which is flaky and frankly full of cowards. You buy into all the left-wing narratives that Donald Trump's the problem, Donald Trump's this, Donald Trump's that, he's unpresidential, he causes all this drama, he's involved in all of these scandals. It's all his fault. You feed into their strategy, fall into their trap, and leave your party's political candidate weak, vulnerable and unsupported. That's exactly what the neocons have been doing for the last 6 years, cowering, assuming the fetal position anytime the mainstream media attacks, cowering in fear. And the assumption is that if you ditch your president, if you ditch the leader of your political party, that it's all magically going to go away. Of course not. That's not how it works with the schoolyard bully. Why would that work with mainstream media? It's 10 times more relentless and vicious. The last 6 years, cowardly neocon hacks have essentially opened the door, left themselves unguarded to mainstream media attacks. Basically accepting free punches to the face. Now you expect to capitulate to these lunatic leftists in their war against conservative values. We changed our leader. Are you happy now, leftist? Will you love us now? Will you treat us fairly now that we got rid of the evil orange man? It's completely ridiculous. Of course not. They're gonna attack Ron DeSantis, probably 10 times more than they attacked Donald Trump, because they view him as more of a threat. The problem isn't Donald Trump. The problem is the cowardly GOP ways. And this weird standard that these neocons have, or this weird focus, this twisted focus, caring more about what the New York Times is writing about them and about their leader in political party than the truth, the reality, are fighting back against these phony narratives. What Republicans want is for all the drama to go away, for us to get back to the old times where Democrats and Republicans were friends. It's never going to happen. Those days are long gone. The mainstream media has been totally taken over. It's totally dominated by Democrat political will, Democrat actors, and there's no going back. They've officially waged a cultural war, a political war on conservatives. And the idea that you're going to win that battle by cowering and trying to do things that you think is going to make them happy is frankly pathetic. There's only one way to win, and that's to beat them at their own game, to actually stand up on your own 2 feet and stand up for what's right. Stand up for the leader that your political party has nominated and actually defend that individual against all these heinous, despicable, slanderous attacks. Pivoting to Ron DeSantis fixes nothing. Ron DeSantis is Donald Trump 2.0. At least that's how the media views him. They view him as Donald Trump, but even more dangerous, Ron DeSantis has also made some enemies, namely Disney. Just in Florida, Governor DeSantis signs bill stripping Disney of self-governing status. All right. Well, seem to remember, I think I read this once, that Disney is a parent corporation, or probably subsidiary of another parent corporation, probably owned by a massive investment firm that probably controls a significant portion or a significant slice of the mainstream media pie. Obviously, I'm being sarcastic. I don't have a vague memory of that, and just read that somewhere. I know that for a fact. It's common knowledge. Everybody knows that. You're telling me that Ron DeSantis has made it Disney public enemy number 1 in the state of Florida, and now as he sets his AI as becoming the next president of the United States, possibly in this election cycle, maybe in the next, you're telling me that the mainstream media is just gonna let this guy go? He's gonna be there, boy. Not going to happen. The mainstream media will stop at nothing but the total collapse and destruction of conservative politics. The GOP, the Republican Party, whatever you want to call it, no matter who it is, they will play their dirty games. They will lie, the make-up stories, make up statistics, anonymous sources leaking. It'll be a never-ending propaganda battle, a cultural war against whoever that conservative leader is. Again, I guess finish up and wrap this video. The conclusion is Donald Trump is not the problem. Ron DeSantis is not the problem. The problem is the cowardly GOP letting the Democrat establishment and the media establishment walk all over them. It's time to double down, unite, support and defend Donald Trump, craft a coherent message targeting Democrat incompetence, corruption and immoral actions and policies. It's time to get based and BTFO the Democrats instead of whatever the heck the Lindsey Graham, Mitch McConnell, Nikki Haley, Jeb Bush. The list is really growing by the day. Liz Cheney, Adam Kinzinger, Mitt Romney faction of the party is suggesting you do. I don't know. That's just my thought. And I felt like this moment with Joy Reid perfectly reinforces the point that I've been trying to make. Hopefully you guys see where I'm coming from. And this is some big news, this topic. My beliefs or the stance that I'm taking on this particular geopolitical issue continues to get further and further reinforced every time this frickin' Zelensky guy opens his damn facehole. My view of him gets lower and lower and lower. And the same thing with these globalist goons who seem hell-bent on starting World War III. You know, Donald Trump the other day said this World War III has never been closer than it is right now. And it seems like hyperbolic rhetoric, and you know, people laughed at Tim Pool all the time talking about World War III, or of course, his constant warnings of the Civil War. But it really seems as though, pun intended, the intention here seems to keep poking the bear until total global chaos erupts in a debt who that benefits other than this elitist cabal who clearly has some sort of evil master plan. We're in the midst of a generational economic crisis. The last thing the world needs is economic stability. And these freaks, I mean, there's no other way to describe it, the things that they're saying, in my view, are getting absolutely indefensible. Look, I get emails all the time, I get Twitter messages, and I get YouTube comments. Everybody's a geopolitical expert. And every week someone's trying to lecture me as to why endless American taxpayer dollars being spent in Ukraine, further exacerbating this issue, is somehow justified. Man, I am just not seeing it. I get the emotional bait, this whole dynamic from back in the Cold War, Russia versus the United States, Vladimir Putin bad. I think a lot of Westerners and especially a lot of Americans are very susceptible to that kind of rhetoric. And the Democrats have done a hell of a job over the last 7 years focusing on Russia, but I'm trying to look at this from a totally neutral perspective. And I'm still waiting on answers that these globalist goons who promote this war as being justified, and not only justified but necessary, I'm still waiting for them to answer those very simple questions. Let me show you guys exactly what I mean. I think these questions are fair. I think anybody who's looking at this from a neutral, fair perspective, and not just from a Western perspective, should be thinking about these questions and these ideas. I don't think it's Russian misinformation or Russian propaganda. Alright, folks. So let's first start off with justification. Western and mainstream media outlets want you to believe that Russia is essentially on a path towards world domination as Vladimir Putin on his last breath. It's his last-ditch effort. He's essentially trying to mimic or mirror Adolf Hitler. He wants to take over the Western world by force, hell-bent on world domination. Vladimir Putin bed. The West is just standing up for democracy. Now, I'm not exactly convinced that democracy even exists in Ukraine in the first place. But anyways, that's another issue that we'll probably get into later. That's the narrative that the mainstream media has been peddling, while the Russians themselves are saying something entirely different. The Russians are saying that Crimea and the Donbass region are ethnically Russian areas that used to be part of the Soviet Union, and the actual democratic will of the individuals of the populace in those districts or in those areas want to move the border and want to be absorbed by the Russian state. There have been some votes in the past that have suggested that that's actually the case. Of course, the counter-argument from Western globalists is that those votes cannot be trusted. They were rigged. But NBC News just did a segment where they actually went on the ground in Crimea, and nearly every single Crimean citizen that they interviewed was actually pro-Russian. Is Crimea Russian or Ukrainian? Russian now. Of course, Russian 73-year-old practice Soviet tells me Zelensky will not get Crimea back because we have our commander-in-chief Putin. Every one of them told us that they are Russian, and that if President Zelensky thinks Ukrainian forces can come here, they will fight them. President Zelensky has said that the Ukraine war started here and it will end here. But no one was able to tell us how it will end and how much more blood will be spilled. And following this interview, Ukraine now put NBC News journalist Kurs Simmons on their kill list. Sounds like a beautiful, definitely not corrupt, definitely democratic, egalitarian government that we should be supporting with hundreds of billions of dollars in taxpayer aid. And so the question that I'm asking myself is, in a situation like this, we could probably describe this as an extreme border dispute. Is the answer really all-out war, billions of dollars in damages, ammunition, weaponry, and thousands of lost lives, both soldiers on either side and civilians, or is the solution diplomatic? If the people of Crimea and Donbass actually are Russian, identify as Russian, and want to be absorbed by the Russian state, if that's their democratic will. And isn't the West? Possibly, I'm not saying for sure. Isn't the West possibly fighting a war against the democratic will of these regions? If we're truly being honest here? Am I promoting Russian propaganda by simply asking questions about the legitimacy of this war? Again, I've tried to approach the situation without any emotion from a totally neutral perspective. And the only way that you could do that as a hypothetical mediator in any type of drama or dispute between two parties is to listen to both sides equally. You can't just take one person's side and totally ignore and condemn the other side and not listen to any of their grievances, which may actually be legitimate. I think that's fundamentally unfair. I think that's how you blindly just support a war machine that may not be doing the right thing. The second issue is Russia's claim of NATO expansion, that NATO has been trying to absorb states that are on the border with Russia, so they can expand their NATO forces, essentially alongside the entire Russian border. Now, there's no official agreement on this particular issue. But there was a verbal agreement. I believe back in the 1990s. There was a verbal agreement, a promise to not expand NATO to Russia's border. Russia claimed the expansion of NATO as a national security risk for the nation, said that it was a violation of a previous agreement. And it was one of the main reasons why they were sending military to their border. I pointed this out a year ago. When the invasion first launched, I was called a conspiracy theorist. I was told that I didn't understand history, that I was pushing Russian propaganda. But now, fast forward a year later, we have a NATO chief specifically saying this. They won't like what they wrote. Thank you very much. WWG1WGA. Give me your thoughts below and